10 Typewriter Tales, a collection of stories, written by Thomas Fincham, narrated by John William Cantiz. The Airport. He stood in line and waited. There were 8 passengers before him, with one who had enough luggage for a family of 10. He was in no hurry, though. He had made sure to be here as early as possible. The airport terminal was packed with travelers, some rushing to catch their flights, while others, like him, had planned ahead and were meandering at their own pace. He glanced at the people around him. It looked like chaos, but it was an organized chaos. He always found it fascinating how thousands of people could pass through these terminals daily, with few, if any, incidents. If there were any, then he had failed to see them throughout his extensive travels. Why was this, he thought. Maybe the passengers were too focused on getting to their destinations to cause a problem. He went up to the counter. The lady behind it said, "Any luggage to check in?" "No, just a carry-on." He held up the black nondescript bag for her. After she had scanned his ticket, examined his passport, and issued the required identification tags, he was on his way. He moved past the waiting row of passengers and headed for the other end of the terminal. He scanned his surroundings. Young travelers with camping-sized backpacks slung on their backs, families with kids in tow and luggage piled high up on carts, porters rushing huge boxes with the owners following right behind, executives in business suits, pulling compact luggage on wheels. It was only at the airport that you saw such a variety of people in one place. Once again, he stood in line, but this one was shorter than the first. His turn came. He placed the carry-on on the conveyor belt. He had packed light with 2 dress shirts, 1 dress pant, an undershirt with matching underwear, socks, and a paperback novel. In the plastic tray, he placed his wallet, keys, watch, and passport. He then removed his shoes, which were without laces, and placed them in as well. "Your belt, sir," the officer said. "I'm not wearing one," he said, lifting his shirt. The officer waved him through. He went through the metal detector, and as he'd planned, it did not beep. He gathered his belongings and then glanced at his watch. He was early. He surveyed the area and began to stroll past the many airport shops. He spotted one and ordered a cappuccino. He sat across from the coffee house. He took a sip of the cup. The froth covered his upper lip. He licked it clean. He looked around. Travelers were busy purchasing overpriced items from the shops. With time to spare in between flights, people would do anything to occupy themselves, even if it meant spending $6 on a hot drink, which is what he had done. He found airports captivating. It was the one place where people from all over the world came together with a mutual understanding. They were only there to get somewhere else. Airports were the hub from which you reached your final destination. But he had no destination. He was there for another purpose. When he was halfway through his drink, he removed a piece of paper from his pocket. The note contained instructions. He had received them through the internet, more specifically through an online forum. Joining this forum was by invitation only, and one that took him close to a year to become a member. There were many codes that had to be broken, puzzles needing to be solved, red herrings to be avoided, and even accusations that had to be proven false. He had followed the first set of instructions to the letter. Now for the others. He downed the remainder of the cappuccino and moved to the restrooms. Inside, he splashed cold water over his face. He was clean-shaven, with a pale complexion and dark hair that was neatly parted from the middle. His features were, if one had to describe them, plain and ordinary. There was nothing about him that stood out. Even his attire was unassuming. He would blend in very nicely. He grabbed his carry-on and went to the lockers next to the restrooms. He spotted one in the corner. He placed his carry-on, money, wallet, keys, and passport in the locker and locked it. He had nothing on him except for his shirt, pants, socks, and shoes. He was ready. He went up the escalators and headed to the airport's first-class lounge. A woman with a bright smile greeted him. "Hi," she said. "I'm here for the AA meeting." "Right this way." She led him through the lounge with its comfortable leather chairs, soothing low lighting, and private bar, all the way to the end, near the windows where a group of people were already seated. A man with his hair gelled back, wearing a gray shirt and beige pants, instantly stood up. "This is a private meeting," he said, in a thick French accent. He pulled out a card, which contained a series of numbers, and handed it to him. The Frenchman examined the card, and then smiled. "Welcome, monsieur." He extended his hand. "Please, have a seat. We will begin shortly." He sat on a spacious white leather chair. Across from him sat an Asian man with a black shirt buttoned up to the collar, no tie, black pants, and white shoes with no socks. Beside the Asian man, on a separate chair, was a tall blonde with striking features, wearing a tight dress that went down to her knees. Next to the blonde, on another separate chair, was an older woman with graying hair, wearing a simple dress that went down to her ankles. They were all looking at him with suspicion. He could feel the blonde's eyes pierce into him, the Asian man's stare cut through him, and the older woman's gaze bear down on him. After a few minutes, which felt much longer, another man appeared, led by the same hostess who had brought the others here. The man was wearing a white shirt with matching white pants, black dress shoes, and a white cowboy hat. "This is a private meeting," the Frenchman said. "Is it?" The cowboy looked confused. "Do you have something for me?" the Frenchman asked. "Oh, yeah." The cowboy removed the familiar-looking card. After examining it, the Frenchman said, "If you read the instructions, you'll know that hats are not permitted." The cowboy took his hat off and held it up for him to see. "It's harmless." "It's bad enough I have to wear these shoes instead of my boots." The Frenchman examined the hat and then smiled. "Welcome, monsieur. Please, have a seat." The cowboy sat next to him. He noticed the area they were sitting in was further away from the general seating area. This is good, he thought. What they were about to discuss should never be heard by the public. The Frenchman sat down and faced them. "Thank you for coming to this AA meeting. We should really call it a AAA meeting because it's held at an airport." He laughed, but none of them joined in. "In our line of work, precautions must be taken, and that is why it is being held here. You will not find a more safe location than this. As you have already passed through the security points, there is nothing to worry about." He looked at each one of them, but none took their eyes off one another. "Ours is a lonely business, one that we bear by ourselves. No one knows what we do, not even our loved ones, but most importantly, no one will understand why we do it. It is a great burden that we carry all by ourselves. One, if not relieved, can impact our tasks. The purpose of this meeting is to give you the opportunity to share your experiences. The rules are simple. No real names and no specific details. Would anyone like to go first?" He looked around. When there were no volunteers, he said, "I'll start then. I am Pierre. Not my real name, of course. I've been doing this for over 15 years now. My first one was when I was a teenager. I was in Paris on a warm summer night. I still remember the man. He was sitting in a restaurant drinking a Romani Conti, one of the most expensive wines in France. I waited and watched him. He kept ordering more and more. When he finally came out, he could barely walk straight. After that, the man never drank again. I went back to that restaurant the next day and ordered a glass of Romani Conti, and it is the only wine I drink now." Pierre smiled and placed his palms together. He waited for someone else to speak up. After a little hesitation, the blonde spoke. "My name is Olga," she said in a Russian accent. "I do this for 3 years. I don't like it, but I like the money. My first time was in a club in Moscow. The man was very bad. He was son of local crime boss. He ordered a stolichnaya. It is Russian vodka. He was not very nice to me. He told me he owned the club, and he owned me. I gave him the drink, and I ran from the club. Next day, I read in the newspaper what happened. I have served drink 11 times now." She rubbed her moist eyes. "Thank you, Olga, for sharing that with us," Pierre said. "Someone else, please." The Asian man spoke. "I am Yoshi." His voice was hard and deep. "I do this for 7 years now. I am very good at it, but I don't want to do it anymore. My first time was in Osaka. It was a girl. She was daughter of a very rich businessman. One night, I see her at a karaoke club. She sings very good. I buy her sake. She laughs loud. She is very happy. I buy her more sake. When she is drunk, I take her out of the club. I get her in a taxi, but she never get home." There was a pause, as if Yoshi was contemplating his last sentence. She was very nice to me. I do this many times more, but I never forget her." Pierre turned to the group. More specifically, he turned to him. He coughed and started. "My name is Smith. I've only done it once. I can't say I enjoyed it, but I can't say I didn't either. It was last year in Niagara Falls, Canada. The man was a heavy gambler and drinker. He frequented the casino there. One night he became very unruly. He screamed that they cheated him out of his money. The casino threw him out. I met him outside and offered to buy him a drink. I took him to a drinking spot around the corner. He cried when he got drunk. He was a family man with bad habits. After that night, the casino never saw him again." Smith choked back tears. "He told me he had a wife and 2 young children. I have not been able to sleep well since then." Pierre said, "It's okay. That is why we are here." Smith said, "Can I get some water?" Pierre wasn't sure, but Smith quickly waved at a hostess. The hostess returned with bottles of spring water for each of them. She handed him his and placed the rest on a table. Smith examined the cap, unsealed it, and took a sip. Seeing this, both Yoshi and Olga grabbed a bottle each, checked to make sure they were sealed, then proceeded to drink from them. Pierre turned to the last 2. The older woman spoke in a British accent. "My name is Madeline. My first one was almost 22 years ago. It was at a pub in Manchester, and it was a woman. The woman's husband owed a lot of money to the bookies. He lost it on football and cricket games. One night, at the pub, she was drinking by herself. I got the courage to go up to her. She was feeling terrible. Her financial situation wasn't good, and she was there to drink her worries away. I felt bad for her, so I bought her more drinks. We both left when the pub closed." Tears streamed down Madeline's face. Smith leaned over, opened a bottle of water, and offered it to her. "Thank you," Madeline said. After that night, her husband never bet on another game again. "Thank you for sharing that, Madeline," Pierre said. They all thanked her. Madeline wiped the tears. "What's worse, after that I never did it again, but now, as I get older, I want to do it again." They didn't know what to say to her. Finally, it was the cowboy's turn. He pushed his hat up. "The name's Billy Bob," he said in a Texan accent. "I've been doing this before y'all learned to count. My first time was 35 years ago. 35! I remember it like it was yesterday." He was an old, gruff man, a nasty piece of work, wretched in his ways. He used to go down to a tavern, down by the river, and drink by himself. One night, I see him hurl insults at a waitress. Poor girl left crying. I went up to him and told him what I thought of him. He eyed me hard. No one had dared say anything to him until then. He laughed and bought me drinks. He could drink anyone under the table, but not me. No sirree, Bob. Let's say after that night, no waitress ever cried again because of him. Billy Bob leaned over, grabbed a water bottle, unsealed it, and chugged it down. "Thank you, Billy Bob," Pierre said. "Thank you all for sharing what must have been very difficult for you. I assure you, it will feel like a heavy weight has just been lifted off your chest. You'll feel like you can breathe again. For those who don't want to continue with this lifestyle, you will feel free. For those who don't want to give it up, it'll make it a little easier." "I'll toast to that," Smith said, raising his bottle. They all did, even Pierre. "Now," Pierre said, "I don't have to remind you not to tell anyone of this meeting. Another meeting will be held at an unknown date, time, and place. You will be informed accordingly. We have flights to catch. Thank you for coming. Au revoir." They looked at each other. There was an overwhelming sense of understanding. It was as if they all knew each other's secret, and it was okay. To keep something inside for that long was crippling, and to have it out was an immense release. None of them shook hands or even embraced. That was not how it worked. They merely acknowledged the fact that there were others who felt what they did. Smith walked away, headed straight for the restrooms, but instead of going in, he moved past them and went straight to the lockers. He gathered his belongings and went to the other side of the terminal. He bought another overpriced cappuccino and found a spot in the corner. A family with 4 young children sat near him. The mother was having trouble getting them to eat their meals. He took a sip. The froth again covered his upper lip. He saw one of the children look over at him. With his tongue mimicking a windshield wiper, he cleaned it off. The child smiled back. He looked over and saw them. First Yoshi, then Madeline, then Olga, then Billy Bob, and finally Pierre strolled by him. None looked his way. They must have noticed him, but did not show it. Precisely 20 minutes later, he bolted. Instead of heading to a flight, he exited the terminal. Outside, he hailed an airport limousine. The driver, who was wearing a turban, asked, "Where do you want to go, sir?" He gave him an address. The limousine turned left, then right again, until it was on the main road. He looked back, and when he was certain it was clear, he relaxed. He pulled out the card with the series of numbers. Also written on it were 2 letters, AA. A smile crossed his face. It didn't stand for Alcoholics Anonymous, but for Assassins Anonymous. The meeting he'd just been through had nothing to do with regular people wanting to get sober, but for hired killers suffering through remorse. What a joke. If you have regrets, then you confess to the authorities and pay for your crimes. Or better yet, you end your own life like you did your targets. But both options were no longer necessary. Unknown to all of them was that he had been to the lounge before. He had spoken to the very hostess who had brought the bottled water. The hostess's father had been murdered some 2 years ago. He had convinced her that one of them had something to do with it. Using a syringe, a lethal and deadly liquid had been injected into the bottled water. He knew they would be suspicious if the sealed caps were tampered with, so the injection was done from the side, with the manufacturer's label wrapped over it. The plan was, when he waved to the hostess, she would bring the bottled water containing the poison but hand him one without it. In the end, he was able to convince them all to take a drink. He looked at his watch. About now, the mixture would be taking effect. They would all be on their respective flights. His smile widened. It took him a year to finish this assignment, but his employers would remunerate him handsomely. Unlike his targets, he could retire and leave the life behind. But he would have no regrets. He felt something in his throat. He tugged at his collar. His chest suddenly constricted. Sweat rolled down his temples. He felt numbness in his left arm. Everything began to spin around him. He was having a heart attack. Before he collapsed, a thought ran through his mind. I was also a target. This has been 10 Typewriter Tales, a collection of stories, written by Thomas Fincham, narrated by John William Cantees. Copyright 2021 by Thomas Fincham. Production copyright by Thomas Fincham.